Baker with a tremendous stop. This is Fox. In front. Saved by Baker. What anticipation by Baker. When he comes in, he's got a shot. Poke checked away. No shot. Here's one. Save.
Jim, I can't talk enough about the play of Baker.
Has been a solid hockey game. Hickey coming in. Drop pass in front. Save. Baker makes a big one.
He's been hot, baby.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the director of media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Boland. Nice to see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. This is the classic hockey show for classic hockey fans. We celebrate the history of the game with stories told by the select few who actually lived it. Get ready for an all-access pass to the heart of the hockey universe. Episode 58 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast features goaltender Steve Baker, who played with the New York Rangers between 1979 and 1983. Baker was a standout at Union College, coached by the legendary Ned Harkness. He was drafted by the Rangers with the 44th pick overall in the 1977 NHL Entry Draft. Now, Steve began his NHL career losing just one of his first 10 games in 1979-80. He later gained great acclaim in the 1981 playoffs when the upstart Rangers upset the LA Kings and St. Louis Blues to advance to the Stanley Cup semifinals with Steve as their starting goalie. Steve was selected to represent the USA in the 1981 Canada Cup, where he served as Tony Esposito's backup. Steve offers some great insights on playing with Tony O. Steve also played for 5 Hockey Hall of Fame coaches during his career: Ned Harkness, Fred Shero, Herb Brooks, Craig Patrick, and Bob Johnson. And he talks about the impact each had on his career and his life. He also has fun memories of Gordie and Colleen Howe from the New England Whalers 1978 training camp. Injuries curtailed Steve's NHL career, but he quickly embarked on a successful career as a media executive. Today, Steve is the Chief Hockey Officer of 3 Ice Hockey. 3 Ice is a new and totally independent 3-on-3 professional ice hockey league in North America. Based on the 3-on-3 full-size rink overtime format, 3 Ice is uniquely designed to give fans the speed, skill, and excitement they love 100% of the time. For more information, visit 3, that's the number 3, ice.com. Now, let's talk classic hockey with number 35, Steve Baker. We're back on the show with goaltender Steve Baker. You'll remember him from the New York Rangers, Team USA in the Canada Cup in 1981, and of course as a Calder Cup champion with the Maine Mariners in 1984. Steve Baker, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Mark. It's always nice to talk to a fellow Boston guy.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, you grew up in Braintree, Massachusetts, right in the heart of Bobby Orr and the Big Bad Bruins era, and I can imagine yourself and your family perhaps watching Channel 38 and watching the Bruins. Was that the case?
Yeah. In fact, you said Channel 38. I remember we used to have the big UHF antenna on the top of the TV, and you turn it to try to get a better signal, go cha-chunk, 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 cha-chunk. But you remember those days. Times have changed, certainly, with new technology. But, yeah, I grew up one of 8 kids. Wow. There were 6 boys, 2 girls, and I had 2 older brothers that needed a target to shoot at, and I got elected.
So often back in that time era, I've talked to a number of goalies, Phil Meir, Bruce Landon, etc. It's never necessarily something that you set out to do. It's something that kind of was foisted upon you, generally because of siblings involved. But nonetheless, you become a goaltender, and I was curious, Is that something that you found to be a natural talent of yours? You always had the great glove hand anyway, but is that something that you took a liking to right away?
Well, I appreciate that on the glove hand comment. I always called that my bread and butter because you could control the play with with a good glove hand.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, I was into baseball, and I was a catcher in baseball. And so I guess those tools of, I'll say, intelligence, tools of intelligence carried over into the hockey mindset, being a field general, if you will, in the middle of the play, being responsible for a lot of, key elements during the course of the game, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I kind of gravitated towards that. And like I say, my two older brothers did need a target. We always used to tell people when they were coming to our home back in Braintree, just look for the garage doors with all the holes in them from all the pucks being shot through it. And that's kind of where I got my start.
High school hockey was real competitive in the Bay State in the 1970s. Talk a little bit about your experience playing high school hockey in Massachusetts and how that prepared you for the next level of playing college hockey.
Yeah, for me, the Catholics were what it was all about in high school back when I was playing, the Catholic Conference. So
Mm-hmm.
you had huge rivalries with, schools like Malden Catholic and Matignon, Archbishop Williams, which is where I actually went up in Braintree. And, you had BC High and Catholic Memorial, Christopher Columbus. There were probably a few others in there as well, Zavarian, et cetera. I mean, that's really where, people would kind of bear down and watch the best high school scene in the state. And it was a great proving ground, obviously, for one to develop their skill set and play at a very high level. And obviously get exposure into the college game, which I did.
With your success in high school, of course, you get a lot of attention from college coaches. Ultimately, you choose to go with Ned Harkness, rebuilding a program at Union. Now, Harkness, of course, is a U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame coach, a real legend. Talk a little bit about that process of choosing Union College.
I mean, Union was founded in 1795. It's 224 years old, so it's a very old school, one of the oldest in the country. They had hockey, obviously, back in the 1800s and into the turn of the century, and then for whatever reason it stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So Ned's job was, once he was brought in there, is to actually get the rink finalized and built in the fall of 75 and go out and recruit a team to come in and actually play a schedule, which he had to cobble together at the 11th hour when they made the announcement. And what he did do is he brought in a literal all-freshman varsity. So we were all 18-year-olds. I know a lot of the kids now that go to college, they spend a couple of years in junior, get a little bigger, stronger, faster, come in at 20-year-old. We came in at 18-year-olds, many of which were not even shaving. And we competed, with a schedule that Ned had put together for us, and we didn't lose much. I think maybe 2 or 3 times in the first year. I think 7 times overall in the time that I was there. I think the record was like 45-7-2. So we did a lot of winning, and that certainly fell under, Ned's umbrella of, winning championships at RPI and also doing the same at Cornell. He knew how to put teams together and how to motivate players. It was a wonderful experience playing for him.
Incredibly, all that Union success comes to an abrupt and immediate halt as Ned Harkness gets into a dispute with the college administration. He quits. The entire team follows suit, and the JV team actually becomes the varsity team and concludes the season. What are your recollections of that incredible set of circumstances?
Yeah, it was a sad turn of events. There's no question about that. But I mean, you can imagine, if you're in a little small college environment, because I believe they only have about maybe 2,200, 2,300 undergrads on the campus. So it's very small, very quaint. There's a couple of national monuments on the campus. A beautiful campus. It's the first planned campus in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. And first non-denominational campus in the United States of America. And all of a sudden, you've got this big-time program being dropped into your laps in a brand-new building on campus. And all these flying freshmen running around, scoring up a storm, and I just think that there was, just natural, maybe human jealousy, perhaps maybe that, started to kind of work into the works. But at any rate, at the end of the day, there were some point of view differences, and Ned decided that it was best to kind of pick up and move on, and that kind of left us in the lurch because we went to the school to play for a legend, Mike Harkness. I had a hard decision because I had been drafted the year prior by the Rangers and also Birmingham and the WHA, and I really couldn't afford at that point to just sit out and do nothing. My intent was to transfer to Cornell and play right away for them because we ended our tenure at Union. I think it was at the end of the first semester, so I was going to transfer in January. But they did put a team on the ice, so that kind of ticks next to our ability for us to kind of move elsewhere. So I was between a rock and a hard place. I turned to the Rangers, said, what do I do? And they said, listen, we'll send you out to Toledo. And I was out there for the blizzard of 78, which was an interesting experience, stuck in the Commodore Perry Hotel in downtown Toledo, Ohio, eating nothing but lentil bean soup for 3 or 4 days in a row. But that being said, I got there and my head wasn't 100% on straight. It really wasn't. I didn't play great. Rangers ultimately brought me into New Haven. Got a chance to actually back up and watch Doug Soetart have a wonderful end of season run into the playoffs, the Calder Cup playoffs, and we actually got beat by Maine in the Calder Cup final. So that was a good experience to me to, practice at that level, see how Dougie operated, how he handled himself. He was a great pro. And, from there, that's pretty much how that season ended up. But it was a lot of twists and turns in the road, to say the least, Mark.
That's for sure. There often are. And going back to Toledo for 1 second, you played 10 games there for Ted Garvin, another former Detroit Red Wing coach. And I believe on your team that year was Mike Ruzioni. And I was curious, did you know Mike previously? And so it must have been pretty interesting to see him then become the toast of the country just a couple years later.
Yeah, it was wonderful to play with Mike. He was a great teammate, great guy, still is obviously to this day. His accomplishments, along with a lot of my buddies in that 1980 Olympic team, have obviously gone down in history as being one of the most significant moments in all hockey. But Mike was great. We had known each other from playing in the Pro-Am League in the summer in the Boston area. The professional guys were around, as well as the B1 college guys always got together and had very competitive matches over the course of 7 months. So I knew him from that, obviously knew him from his BU prowess. He was great to me while I was there in Toledo, and obviously went on to bigger and better things.
As you noted, you were drafted not only by the Rangers, but also by the Birmingham Bulls. So 78-79 season, the year of the so-called baby Bulls in Birmingham, they already have Ernie Wakely in camp. They end up bringing in Pat Riggin, along with 5 other 18-year-olds from the Ontario League primarily. And you find yourself, in the way the WHA worked, in New England Whalers training camp. Now, I've talked to a lot of players who were at that camp, Jordy Douglas, for example, Jeff Brubaker, Mike Rogers, Mike Antonovich, and I was curious from your viewpoint as somebody who appreciates hockey in its history, it had to be pretty incredible going to camp with Gordie Howe, John McKenzie, Dave Keon, etc.
Oh, that was awesome. Just to give you a backstory there, once Birmingham made the move on Pat Riggin, who was a fine lefty goalkeeper, as you know, and had a nice career, they no longer needed my services, so they ended up actually trading my services to New England. And, I'm talking to New England and I'm talking to the Rangers about coming to camp. What transpired with the Rangers is Freddie Sherrill and Mickey Keating came in. So I was drafted by the Ferguson regime. So you've got Freddie and Mickey making decisions, and they're like, hey, man, we didn't draft you. We don't know you. And I wanted a little bit of love, and I didn't get a whole lot of love. And so New England came up with some cash for me to come to camp, and, went to their camp, had a pretty decent camp. one of the greatest experiences, and you kind of highlighted it, was having Gordy there, Mark and Marty. And Gordie Howe was kind enough to take myself and Peter Crawford, who was another gentleman that played with me, Bill Crawford's, his brother Bobby, and Lou Crawford, and Mark Crawford, etc. Gordie invited us over his house for lunch. You have double sessions and training camps. He said, "Well, over to my place over in Glastonbury for lunch." His wife Colleen was kind enough to make us some nice tomato soup and grilled tomato sandwiches. I never forget that when you hang out with Gordie Howe.
Right.
And he was nice enough to walk us around his house. He had an indoor pool. He had a wonderful mantle with an APCO trophy and also a Stanley Cup trophy there. And it was just great to be able to spend time with him. All the other legends that you alluded to in camp, Davey Keon and Johnny Pine McKenzie and Ricky Lee and George Lyle and, young guys like Jordy and Bruce Baker that were going to be up-and-comers and certainly were up-and-comers. I ended up pulling my groin, interestingly enough, in that camp. And the Whalers had a deal with Springfield, the American Hockey League, which was mostly an LA-run enterprise,
right,
where they could put some players in there. And I ended up going to camp there. When they broke camp, they sent me there, and I'm hobbling around a little bit and getting medical treatment. But I was there, interestingly, with Mario Lessard. And Mario had a good career, obviously, with the Kings.
Right.
But, proved himself there with the American Hockey League Springfield club prior to. And I got released from camp, still hobbling a little bit. So I turned back to the Rangers and said, you need some help. And they said, yeah, we need you in New Haven right away. They had made some moves with a lot of guys they had under contract. And Lindsay Middlebrook was there in New Haven. So it was Lindsay and I that basically took that club and moved it all the way to the Calder Cup finals that year. So, again, a bunch of interesting turns in the road for my career, but this is just, what I was given and how it's laid out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a recent conversation with Bruce Landon, who was there, not as a player when you were there in Springfield, but similar conversation. He was in the Kings camp. He comes down to Springfield. He breaks his hand. He tries playing with a broken hand, and it twists and turns all over the place. And it's interesting when you look back at it, how fate can change at any moment. Especially in the professional sports world. But as you noted, that New Haven Nighthawks team goes to the Calder Cup finals, loses to one of our previous show guests, Blake Dunlop and the Maine Mariners. Team did not lack toughness. Frank Beaton, John Bednarski, Dean the Hulk Turner, and a lot of good young up-and-coming players as well.
Yeah, we could throw in there Dan Clark as well. We had Don Maloney there to start off the season. We had a really great group of young players that melded in well with, Dale Lewis and Tom Cawley and a number of veterans, sinewy veterans, Bobby the Cat Sheehan, pride of Weymouth, Massachusetts.
That's right. I was going to ask you about that. Right next door to you, She-Cat Sheehan.
Yep, Bobby the Cat Sheehan. So we had a great team. Like I say, we got all the way to the Calder Cup finals and ended up bowing to Maine once again. But that being said, one of the unique experiences during that season, I give Freddie Sherrill a lot of credit. The Rangers were going to the finals in '79 against the Canadiens, of course, and we're going to the finals against Maine, and we were waiting for things to kind of shake out. So there was a little bit of time. We're practicing down in New Haven. The Rangers are practicing up at Rye Playland. They were actually in Elmsford at that time. Forgive me. So they were in Elmsford, New York, and Freddie called up and he said, "Let's have a full game between New Haven Nighthawks versus the Rangers."
Wow.
And we were wearing our gear, and they were wearing their gear, and let's put 20 on the clock and let's go. And played three full 20-minute periods, and I got to start and really played well against them. I know I stopped Espo on a breakaway and made some other pretty good saves. When I left the game, we were winning 3-0, as I recall.
Wow.
And so, and nothing against Lindsay, because again, this is the team that's going to the Stanley Cup Finals, right?
Right.
The Rangers were quite a talent in and of themselves, but We ended up, I think, losing the game, 5-3. Might have been 6-3. But, I had a really good outing, and this really was, Fred Shero and Mickey Keating's first chance to see me, perform, in that kind of an environment. They had us up for the finals of the Stanley Cup after we bowed out, and, just being in Madison Square Garden, watch JD do his thing, watch the team do their thing. I mean, that's when it really becomes real to you, You start to say, hey, man, this is what I want for my life. This is the environment I want to thrive in. And, fortunately that next year I had a great training camp, and interestingly enough, we went to Richmond, Virginia. Mickey Keating, I guess, being kind of new on the job, I guess he had forgotten to set up the ice situation for up in New York area. So we ended up going to Richmond, but they had developed a relationship with the ECHL for a Richmond team, Rangers Farm Association. And so we wanted to play a game for the Richmond fans to get them turned on to hockey, and they ended up putting the New Haven Nighthawks, for all intents and purposes, in the Richmond Rifles uniforms, playing the New York Rangers, who had just lost in the Stanley Cup Finals the year before. And here again, I started the game. I think we were up 3-1 when I gave the tag to Jim Seaweed Petty, God rest his soul. And Weed came in, and unfortunately he got hammered on the back end of it, and I don't know, we lost probably 7-4 or something of that nature. But here again, another chance for me to perform at a high level and kind of turn some heads. And I remember at the end of that camp, Danny Summers, who was the head scout, came up to me and said, Stevie, we know what you've done here. Just go down to New Haven, keep your nose clean, play hard, and you're going to get your sniff.
Right.
And sure enough, I did,
Yeah, you sure did. And one of the interesting things we talked about growing up in Massachusetts, and I'm just going to take a sidetrack for a second, is that the big trade in 1975-76, Esposito and Vadnais go to New York, Park and Bertel come the other way. And what that did was that compelled me to basically beg my parents to get cable TV because I could get WOR in New York and watch the Rangers because I wanted to watch Espo. So anyway, during that era, I got a chance to watch a lot of Ranger hockey. And in 1979-80, as you noted, the year before, the Rangers had gone to the finals. Some injuries creep up. You got an opportunity to jump into the lineup, and of course you excel right away, winning, I believe, 9 out of your first 10. First of all, do you recall your obviously, I assume you do, your first NHL game and just the, I guess, exhilaration of finally making it and then just getting on a roll?
Yeah, I mean, nobody would forget that, right? And for me, it was even highlighted that much more so when I showed up in the Rangers locker room. They actually placed my stall between Phil Esposito and Carol Vadnais.
Oh.
And so I'm looking to my left and looking to my right, over 30 years of experience between the two of them in the National Hockey League, guys that I grew up watching in Boston, grew up idolizing in Boston, particularly Espo. And so, it was pretty amazing, but we tied Minnesota came back to tie us, but it was a 4-4 tie at Madison Square Garden. I want to say maybe November 28th or somewhere along there in 79 that I got my first sniff. And I mean, it was just it was an unbelievable experience. A lot of my family came down from Boston. I was able to grab some tickets off the guys on the team. And then whatever that I couldn't provide for them, big family, they scalped out front. So they were all in the building, and it was just a wonderful experience to be able to share with them, and obviously put into my own personal accomplishments.
This is such a colorful and interesting Ranger team. Don Murdoch, Ron Duguay, Espo, Ron Greshner, Barry Beck. What was the scene like? It's not like you're playing in Colorado or something at the time. I mean, it's pretty electric. What was the scene around the hockey team those days in Madison Square Garden?
Well, again, a cast of characters, but also a cast of very, very talented players. And
right.
You mentioned a few of them, guys that had very long and prestigious NHL careers. Certainly Gresh being a lifer in the Ranger uniform, a lot to be said about that. Barry Beck was just a hulk of a defenseman and just multi-talented, multi-skilled. To be there with the Walter Tkachuks and the Steve Bakers that have put in so many great years in the NHL and be part of that overall equation. JD is my roommate oftentimes when it wasn't bad. It was just a wonderful group. You mix in some of the new talent with, Donnie Murdochs and Don Maloney. David Maloney was still young captain at that time initially. We had a great squad, and for me, they embraced me as being, obviously, a rookie stepping into a very difficult situation as the Rangers had a terrible start to the season, and that's why they gave me my opportunity, and we were able to kind of turn it around a little bit, before JD was able to get himself back healthy and start to carry the ball again.
Two players that I also wanted to mention sometimes get forgotten because their peak years were in Sweden and the World Hockey Association, and they battled some injuries, particularly Ulf Nilsson when they came into New York, but two outstanding players. I wanted to get your thoughts on Anders Hedberg and Ulf Nilsson.
Yeah, two great pros. Ulfie, unfortunately, while I was there, did have some injury issues. And I can tell you that he was outstanding in the 81 playoff run when I was actually, in the net, and certainly showed, the skill set that he had for so many years over in Sweden and Winnipeg and the World Hockey, playing alongside with Anders and also Bobby Hull. Just a marvelous centerman that had great vision, thread the needle, make passes that you dream of, Gretzky-esque kind of passing. Just such a smart player. Anders was a real powerful guy. Big chest on him, could skate like the wind, had an unbelievable wrist shot that he could just rip on the fly, and maybe perhaps one of the best backhands I've ever seen in hockey.
Right.
And I always tell a funny story. We had a penalty shot. Anders had a penalty shot in the 81 playoffs against Mike Liu. And I came over to grab a little drink of water at the break, and he looked at me. He says, what do you think? Where should I go? What should I do? Well, I had seen him in practice so many times, and Liu was a big guy like myself and, did like to, drop down and kind of butterfly a little bit and fan, take away the low. I said, you know what? I think you should walk in hard, freeze him, and pull it to your backhand and go roof under the bar. And he kind of nods his head at me. He goes, yeah, it's a good idea. He says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to shoot it right to his legs. I said, okay, go ahead, man. And sure enough, he went in and he just buried it, just clipped the top of his stick, and just enough to trickle back through Mike's legs into the net. But Anders was a terrific player, and obviously the numbers that he put up certainly bear witness to that.
My most recent guest was Joe Watson, former Philadelphia Flyer, and I was talking to him about Fred Shero, who was such at least from a fan's perspective, a mystery. And I was curious how you found Fred Shero to be as a coach.
Well, Fred gave me my opportunity, and so I'm certainly grateful for that. He was kind of a mysterious guy. He'd already won the Cups in Philly, but by the time he got to New York, very quiet, very understated. I'm sure you've heard it before. Had a penchant for writing interesting quotes and motivating quotes on the chalkboard to get the guys going. I have nothing but great things to say about him. He's a Hall of Fame coach, and he was awful good to me. He was one of those guys that, he looked for his players to, really have accountability, if you will, with one another. He was a pros kind of coach, if you will.
Right.
I guess that's what I'm going to try. And, it's all about accountability. It's about, look, you're here, you know you can play at this level. Do the things that you should be doing to make sure that you're ensuring success. And I don't want to have to babysit you guys.
Right.
And he's had great success with it. And, I remember young Ray Shero as a little guy coming around the room and grabbing sticks and pucks and what have you, and he's certainly gone around and had a great career himself as a general manager in the league.
So you've made a strong debut in 79-80. However, you end up now. We're gonna get to some great success in 81, but prior to that, you end up back in New Haven. Can you explain how that all transpired? You played well down there again, but how did that all transpire that you started in New Haven, and then what circumstances led you to be recalled?
Yeah, I mean that's a matter of two-way contracts, right?
Right.
And you've got guys that you got to kind of clear out and make decisions on, and they're on one-ways. You got to showcase them before you can move a contract. And so at the start of that season, after not a great camp, but an okay camp, they decided to send me back down. And Roger Bear was actually our new coach in New Haven at that time. I think Parker McDonald had been there for a number of years, had gone out and taken the LA job. Mm-hmm. So Rod was there, and Jim Troy was his assistant. And Rocky was great, and he just said, Bakes, do what you do. This thing is going to settle in a little bit. We've had some churn with players. We got to get guys used to playing with each other and get to know each other. So we didn't have a tremendous start. We had an okay start. I want to think I was somewhere in around the 500 mark with my personal play, and that's when the call came out from Craig Patrick to come up as we kind of turned the corner. I want to think it was maybe February, looking at the playoff situation. And at that time, the old word used to be that everyone makes the playoffs in the NHL with 21 teams, 16 teams in the playoff. Mm-hmm. Well, we were sitting there at anywhere from 16 to 14, depending upon the day, potentially even, getting pushed out and not making the playoffs. And we had a good run with Craig Patrick behind the bench. He had told me at the deadline, he said, Steve, you're going to be our guy. Just carry the ball and do it. And we had a good run. We got into the playoffs, beating some significant teams down the stretch. And we finished, I think, 14th overall, facing in our first round. I think they were the number 4 team overall with the LA Kings in their Triple Crown line was just phenomenal at that point in time, and they'd had an unbelievable season. That's who we started out against.
Yeah, it was a strong Kings team. Aforementioned Mario Lessard in goal, and of course the Triple Crown line was in full steam ahead. A former Springfield Indian, Charlie Simmer, joining Dave Taylor and Marcel Dayon, and as you said, you knocked them off in round 1. In round 2, even a bigger surprise, the St. Louis Blues, who were the second team overall that year, you knocked them off as well. As you noted, Ulf Dilson playing great hockey at that point up front. You're getting a chance to play in goal, and it's very, again, use that word, electric at Madison Square Garden. It had to be, again, for a team that was kind of trying to find its legs during the regular season, it had to be pretty, again, exciting to be able to roll past 2 strong teams in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, and you having a significant role in that.
Yeah, no question. It was a thrill of my life. I believe the St. Louis Blues had been in the catbird seat for the President's Trophy all season long, and then I think it was the last game of the regular season. They actually got nudged out by the defending Stanley Cup championship Islanders. So they were a terrific team. And during that period that, Craig had kind of gave me the nod down the stretch run, I know we had a trip out to the Checker Dome in St. Louis, and we got romped. I forget the exact score, but it might have been something like 7-2, 7-3, something like that. And, so I got a taste of the kind of offensive power that they had on their squad. And put my tail between my legs, and we came home and ramped it up from there, moving forward. But so I knew going in against certainly the Kings and obviously the Blues that we had our work cut out for us. And I think we took St. Louis down in 6 games, if I'm not mistaken, finishing them at home.
Correct. Yeah, we've had Blake Dunlop and Wayne Babbage on the show previously talking about how their season came to a stunning conclusion at round 2. They obviously had big expectations. That was their breakout year, and things were never quite the same in St. Louis. You go on in the 3rd round, and you do something not quite unusual back in those days, in that you end up losing to a one of the greatest teams of all time, the New York Islanders. No shame in that, however, as they were right in the middle of their dynasty.
Yeah, they were a machine. There's no question about it. And obviously with JD and the Rangers pushing past them that 1 year before they started their 4 in a row, they were not going to let the Rangers slip through the cracks again here. And, having won a cup, they knew what it took to win. Look, no shame. I think we were the 7th team out of 16 series that they actually won to win those 4 cups. I think they went on and won, 19 series in a row before they finally got dethroned in that 5th year. But a total machine, and you have to take your hat off to them and what they accomplished as an organization, as a group of players. Was just incredible. Unfortunately for me, for the Rangers, we had to draw that card, and it was not a good card to be drawn.
No, but it's some good success nonetheless. And you end up playing for the next fall. I think a great honor, being one of 2 goaltenders on the 1981 Team USA Canada Cup team. Now, this Team USA team is a lot of your old friends who would have ended up playing in the 1980 Olympic team, the Neil Brods, etc., but also some guys like Robbie Ftorek, some old pros, and Gordy Roberts, and some future Hall of Famers, Joey Mullen being one, and Mark Howe being another. So a good team to be sure. Quite an honor. But the one guy I'm interested in is a guy who got his citizenship in the country, who obviously was born in Canada, and goaltender Tony Esposito. What was your experience like with Tony O? Did you learn from him in this stretch of time? Did you get a chance to know him a little bit during the Canada Cup? Yeah,
I just again another highlight, right? A chance to actually wear your country's colors in international play. Always a big thrill. I was thrilled to be part of that squad. To have Tony as my partner made it even that much more impactful. I had been a huge Tony fan as a kid growing up. Obviously, the whole thing with Phil and Tony competing against each other and having some great wars and series against each other. But I really got along great with Phil. He was always so kind and generous to me, and I just gained the sense that when I did finally meet Tony, that it was just. It was like old home week. It was like the same person,
Right.
And he took me under his wing. He was terrific to me. As luck would have it, my wife was around for a lot of that tournament, as was his missus and Marilyn. And, the girls hung out a lot. We hung out together, going to some concerts and just having some fun. So it was, it was a great relationship, and, we maintained some contact well after that as well. Whenever we get together, it's, like you saw each other yesterday.
That's great. Good to hear. Now, you talked before about early in your career, you had a groin injury. That kind of resurfaces. Now, Tom Fergus of the Boston Bruins had one of the best wrist shots in all of hockey. And it was a wrist shot from him that kind of accelerates or exacerbates that injury and costs you a significant amount of time. Can you explain that? I think the game was in Boston, and can you relive that painful memory?
Yeah, it was Halloween night, as a matter of fact, in Boston Garden in '81. We had a new coach with Herb Brooks. And I had just come off of, having a long season prior to, losing in the semifinals of Stanley Cup to the Islanders, having a short recoup period, and then getting into training camp with Team USA in the Canada Cup, doing some traveling overseas and what have you, and then not overseas, but, throughout North America, and then ended up going overseas for training camp. Herb decided to have our training camp over in Sweden, and we were over and played in the tournament over there. And so it was a lot of bouncing around. Came back. The team struggled a little bit, trying to adopt Herb's, bob and weave style versus that typical, North American style of up and down your lane kind of thing.
Right.
So we struggled out of the gate. It always makes it difficult on the goaltending when guys are trying to adopt a new system and they're a little unsure. So we saw a lot of rubber, both myself and Stevie Weeks. I got the nod in Boston. The the word was you don't start a rookie in Boston. It was hard enough to play there. This is back in the old Boston Garden with those, little narrow corners and all that stuff, and crazy cross-corner bounces and plays that would come at you left and right. And the Bruins had a nice hockey club. And it was, I was actually feeling, my groin was bothering me a little bit as I got into Boston. You get into the rink, you put on the hydrocollator pack. I pulled it a little bit on a Sunday night game prior to against the Edmonton Oilers. Mm-hmm. It was Fuhrer's first year. They were quite a machine. Pulled it a little bit. Next day we had practice, kind of went through it easy, tried to get a little bit of treatment on it. So I'm here in Boston. I could feel it was still bothering me a little bit. Halfway through the second period, Tommy came in. He was a left shot, came down through the right circle, and then cut across into his forehand and let a quick wrist shot go to my right side. And as I kicked out to do the split kick, it's like my left groin exploded, and it just ripped it right off the bone. Wow. And just exploded. It's the best way to explain it. Pain like I've never had before in my life. The hardest thing about that was, they wanted to put me on a stretcher, and I knew I had a lot of family in the building. I said, no, that's not going to happen. Mike O'Connell, I played with in high school, and he grew up in the Boston area, myself, and played on the Team USA and the Canada Cup team together. Mike O'Connell and Barry Beck got under my arms and kind of helped me off the ice. They got me into the locker room. They started the electric stim and the ice and everything else they do. But talk about a lonely feeling sitting underneath the stands when the team goes back out to go to war. And my dad came walking down into the locker room. They let him into the room, and he had his hat on, kind of a Tom Landry hat that they used to wear back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, Dad, I'm hurt bad. I'm really hurt bad. I could just see, kind of the tears well up in his eyes. Oh. That never happened too much, but it was a tough moment. It really was. No
question about it, and I appreciate you sharing that. And so that injury ends up leading to some missed time. And in 82-83, you're in Tulsa playing for Hawkeye Webster in the Central Hockey League, and you have a full season there. But you've just been at the top of the mountain. You've been in New York. You've been in the spotlight. You've played for your country. What's your attitude like in 82-83 as you're playing for a Tulsa team in the Central League?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I hadn't played in the Central League, so I'm way out in Tulsa trying to figure that out with a wife and 2 kids, and had to prove that I could play still. I had basically lost a year out of my career, and you worried about getting that blackball label, right? This guy's right. Damaged goods. So I had to prove I could play. Fortunately, Tommy was an old pro who happened to be in New England in that first camp of mine too. So it's funny how life proceeds. But he was a great coach. He gave me the reins to play and play a lot. We had a very, very young team, maybe only 4 or 5 veterans on the squad, and the rest of them were young kids, most of which came from the college environment. So we struggled a bit, but I know that I played more games than anyone else in the Central Hockey League that year. I think I played maybe 53, 55 games, if not more, mm-hmm. and certainly proved that I was strong enough to get at it again. Did get a couple of sniffs up with the Rangers with injuries and things of that nature, but I think at that point it was so late in the season, it wasn't Craig nor Herb's choice to really want to move forward and start playing musical chairs with your goalkeeping again. And so, I finished the year out in Tulsa and then joined them, of course, as a Black Sheep Squadron for the playoffs.
Right. I wanted to take one quick step back, and just a couple more questions for you, Steve. But one I failed to ask. I wanted to ask you. You had a unique experience. 2 of the most, probably the most legendary coaches in U.S. hockey history, especially at that time, Herb Brooks and Badger Bob. You played for back-to-back, Badger in the Canada Cup, Herb with the Rangers. Could you compare those two? What was it like playing for each?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I was very fortunate in the time that I had in my college and pro career to have played for 5 Hall of Fame coaches. And a lot of people are lucky to say that they played for 1, but I played for 5 of them. Mm-hmm. And I learned 5 key principles that I applied in my business life that have powered me up throughout my life. And they are trust, open communication, commitment to excellence, accountability, and attention to results. And the trust I always applied to Craig Patrick. He was all about that in the room and about the players, trusting one another to do what they do best as a team. As far as open communication was concerned, that was Bob Johnson. He was a great communicator, and he did some things that were very unique and different than any other coach was, employing back in the day. So it was a great experience that played for him, obviously in Canada Cup for Team USA. Commitment to excellence was Herb Brooks. Herb was all about doing what you had to do, both on the ice and away from the ice, to be the very best athlete that you could be. He always used to have a slogan up in the locker room, as I remember, your body is your asset. And he expected the guys to put time in away from the rink. In terms of, staying in shape, he wanted the guys, 5% or less body fat, which is just incredible. Accountability would obviously point to Fred Shero. I think I chatted about that a little bit earlier, the way he went about his business and what he did. And attention to results, I would throw that at Ned Harkness, who to this day is probably one of the winningest coach percentage-wise ever in the history of college hockey.
Right.
So I was very fortunate. I'm blessed to have been able to experience that. I was just up at Union this last weekend. They had their Hall of Fame induction ceremonies, and we had one of our guys from our class, one of our captains, Jack Rankin, go in. The head coach, Rick Bennett, was kind enough to let us come in the locker room and talk to the players, and I went through those very 5 same principles.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
Yeah, things that I was able to learn and apply to my life, and I feel very blessed that I've had the life that I have, and hockey certainly has been a big part of it.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to ask you about the last season of your career. It's an interesting one. Talking about interesting coaches, you've got Tom McVie and an interesting team in Maine, which has a lot of veteran guys, Gary Howitt and Mike Antonovich, guys like that. And I'm wondering what your attitude like. It's almost, sometimes those things can go either way. You get a lot of veteran guys and they're pouting, they're unhappy or whatever. Or you have a bunch of veteran guys who know that maybe the clock's ticking on their career and they want to go out on a positive note. And one interesting thing that happens for Maine during that year is that Tom McVie is recalled to coach the New Jersey Devils of the NHL, and he's replaced by John Paddock, who's eventually going to become a American Hockey League Hall of Fame coach, and things turn around quickly.
Yeah, so, Johnny was a great guy, did a terrific job, obviously getting everybody pulling in the same direction. That year, the team had struggled a bit in terms of creating an identity for themselves. And again, there were a lot of guys in that club that had NHL experience that were kind of looking at this as the exit stage right to their career. We got to a point towards the end of the season as we turned third base and looked at home plate where we all just kind of got together and said, you know what, let's really give it our best go and let's just win this thing. And I think we finished maybe 4th in our division, so we weren't killing it. And we ended up pulling a bunch of upsets, and next thing you know, we found ourselves playing against Rochester in the finals, and we beat them. I know they were saying that we weren't going to beat them on their ice, but we did beat them at the Old War Memorial in Rochester. And I remember that I'd walked across the ice. This is before cell phones. Walked across the ice. I knew they had payphones on the other side of the rink. I called my wife and I said, honey, I think that's it. I'm going to call it a wrap. Went out with a championship, wanted to compete for the Stanley Cup and win a Stanley Cup. Didn't do that, but I did compete for the Cup. I won a championship now in the Calder Cup. It's time to create a little bit more stability for you and the kids instead of bouncing you around, everywhere but Timbuktu. And, I did just that, went back to school, finished my education, and then moved into a very productive 30-year executive media and sports marketing career.
Yeah, you absolutely have. And you kind of answered my question earlier, my last question, but Steve, the mere fact that you played in the National Hockey League at a high level, had success, So you basically at a very young age set out on a course and reached the pinnacle. You saw also in that by default you've noticed some of the great mentors and leaders you had along the way who greatly impacted your hockey career. But now you carry that over into a successful career off the ice. And I guess you've kind of touched on it, but the carryover from the experiences you had in hockey to your business success. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I've been blessed. As they say, there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in hockey. And when you get to that point where you realize that, maybe your best is left behind. And I would have loved to have said, hey, listen, if I had stayed healthy, what could have been? Mm-hmm. But I had to pursue another road. Everybody's situation is different. And I did have a wife and 2 kids that I was responsible for. I also knew that, I could finish my education in a year and then jump into something and make a career out of it. I think the hockey, the hardest thing is the stepping away in that transition period.
Right.
And I think me going back to school full time really benefited me because it didn't allow me to sulk. It didn't allow me to sit back. I had opportunities to go overseas and play in, the Swedish Elite League, and I just said, I'm gonna have my kids growing up speaking Swedish. It's you gotta just bite the bullet at some point, and I did that. I was very proud of the day that I graduated, and then started to pursue opportunities moving forward. Got into the media business, had some great mentors along the way in that career as well. But the perseverance that you learn and the ability to forge relationships and teamwork and all those 5 principles that I mentioned earlier, the trust, the open communication, commitment to excellence, accountability, intentional results, those are the things that you carry with you that become part of your DNA and forge your success or failure, moving forward. And I always say that was my pyramid of success. You want a wide base in the bottom of any pyramid, and it all starts with trust.
Absolutely. That's very instructional and very motivational, by the way. Now, I have to ask you one last question, which I forgot to ask, but if you think of Steve Baker, you think of that just awesome mask you had, Statue of Liberty mask, and was that something that you had inspired and created yourself? Did you have help with that artistry? How did that all come about?
Yeah, I got to give Greg Harrison, who is a well-known mask maker and artist up in the Toronto area. I have to give Greg big kudos there. The only instruction that I gave him when I was shifting out of a Higgins mask into one of his was that I wanted it to, pay tribute to the city. Mm-hmm. And, this was a fairly new phenomenon, right, where the guys started painting them. I mean, I played just when colored equipment was starting to come in, so nice. It was a bit of a while ago. But Greg did an unbelievable job, and of course, he had the Empire State up the middle, and then a star over the top, and a star in each cheek, in classic Ranger red, white, and blue. And I was very proud to wear that mask. He approached me when they had the Olympic Games in Calgary, and he said they were going to do an exposition of all the old masks and put them up, and he said, would you mind, loaning yours? And I said, sure, love to. From that point, it was such a success at the Calgary Olympic Games that they decided to do the same at the NHL Hall of Fame, which I believe it's still there to this day, and I know it's one of the big, exhibits that folks like to gravitate towards up in Toronto. So I can say that, although I didn't make it to the Hall of Fame, my mask did.
Right. Well, your legacy is a strong one. We really appreciate the time today, Steve. We've learned a lot that we'll be sharing with our fans, and both about hockey and life in general. So, again, thanks for taking the time. We greatly appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, Mark, it's been my pleasure, and I wish you well. You take care of yourself.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. Just a reminder to please consider giving the show a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts. The link is in the show notes. These ratings and reviews help us become a lot more visible and make the show more accessible to hockey fans everywhere. I personally read all the reviews and greatly appreciate them all. If you have thoughts or suggestions for the show, you can contact us through our website at prohockeyalumni.org, or be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Pro Hockey Alumni. Thanks for listening.